Hi, listeners. This is William D. Parker, along with my co-host, Dr. Jen Schwanke. And before we jump into today's show, which is an amazing conversation with our guest, Kurtis Hewson, Jen and I just wanted to take a minute or two. Actually, we're going to take 5 to answer some questions from listeners because we've been doing this as a series the last few weeks. And so, Dr. Jen Schwanke, if you want to connect with her, you can always find her at her website at jenschwanke.com or my resources at my website at williamdparker.com. But Jen, here's the question that I wanted to just to have us chew on for a few minutes before we enjoy the conversation with our guests. This this leader wrote, I would love to know more about how to set boundaries that help with individual self-care. So talk to me about, gosh, I've written an entire book on this, and you and I have talked about this so much, but I want you to just give a response to that question.
Right. I think when principals ask this question, oftentimes there's a hole that needs filled, right? There's something that's wrong for them to ask this question. And the tricky part about it is their answer, the answer that will help them is probably a little bit different than the answer that would help their colleague or someone else they work with or other principals. And I just had lunch with a friend who said to me, I work. That's what I do. It's who I am. And so when I pull out my laptop at night, that's okay. That is what's comforting to me. There are other principals who would say, no, you absolutely have to shut it off. You have to set boundaries and make time for yourself. And so my point there is I think this is a very individualized answer. And I think you have to know yourself really well and know why this question is a pain point, so to speak, and then answer it for yourself. So what is it that brings you peace and joy? And do you have enough of that in your life? Is the ratio balanced as such that you don't feel burned out by work or burned out by life, burned out by parenting, whatever components you have in your life? So I realize that's not helpful probably to someone who says, well, I want Jen to tell me how to set boundaries, but I don't know what your boundaries are. And I don't know what it is that fills your soul enough to make that a truly helpful answer. It's about knowing yourself and then deciding how to set those boundaries to get what you need.
Okay. I'm so glad you
Sorry, Will.
said it. I'm so glad you said it that way because I want to just park here for a moment and say something. I was having a conversation with my wife, Missy, a couple of days ago. We're both in our mid 50s now, and we were talking about a completely different subject. But this was the words that came out of my mouth or something I want to repeat here because just based on what you just said, Jen, I think a lot of us want someone to tell us what to do.
Mm-hmm.
We like application, but we fail to realize that it's actually understanding the importance of principles to live by that therefore help you identify your applications.
Mm-hmm.
And we get those turned around. And I think if I had to rewind myself 30 years ago, I would be a tell me what to do guy.
Mm-hmm.
But now I'm recognizing it actually works a lot better if you tell me first the principles. If I first understand the principles I need to live by, then I can apply those in the way that they fit for me or in my setting or my school or my family. So to this listener, I would just say this. There are some principles I'm sure you are committed to living by. And I'm just going to give you
Mm-hmm.
one that I've heard over and over again as I've worked with leaders, which is, I wish I could have avoided this regret.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that regret that I hear, and I've heard this so many times, Jen, I'm not sure I could count them. Um, I've heard a lot of leaders say, I regret when I look back that I spent so much time investing in other children that I forgot to invest in my own. And and so that's a principle to live by, which is, okay, when I'm looking at the boundaries of my self-care and my work, my individual self-care, which is what this person said, how do I apply my actions based on that principle, which is I want to give to the people in front of me, but I also need to make sure I'm scheduling and motivating myself to give to the people I care about the most. And Jen, I'm just going to use you as a role model. I'm not trying to butter you up or embarrass you, but
Well,
so
go
many
ahead,
times,
butter away. Go
no,
ahead.
but so many times, and even in our working relationship,
Hmm?
when I'm reaching out to you, we're setting up times to record, we're trying to find times to do PD together, whatever it is. Inevitably, you will look at that calendar and you'll weigh it against your family
Mm-hmm.
or your kids' needs, and you'll say no a lot of
Mm-hmm.
times. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
so proud of you for saying, nope, can't do that then because I've already committed to this,
Mm-hmm.
but I can do it then. So principals, give yourself permission to just prioritize those things and then don't feel, I mean, whether you feel guilty about it or not, I'm just saying that's example of one principle to live by that helps you in application.
Right, exactly. And Will, you do it too. You'll go on long hikes with your son. You go to Wales to see your daughter. Making time for those things that make you who you are is so important. And let's end with a wonderful little anecdote. I don't know if it's true or not, but apparently, when she was close to death, Jackie Onassis Kennedy said, "Boy, I wish I hadn't done so many push-ups." So you have to think about that. Where are you spending time on things that just don't matter?
Oh, so good. Well, Principal Matters listeners, if you have questions and you want to send them to Jen and me, feel free to email me at will@williamdparker.com. And Jen, how can they get a hold of you?
They can find me at jenschwanke.com or email me at jen@jenschwanke.com.
Thank you, friends. And I know you're going to love this conversation this week with Kurtis Hewson. Thank you for doing what matters. Principal Matters Podcast, episode 411. Hi, friends. This is Will Parker, host of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast, where each week we bring you inspiring, innovative, and imaginative ideas for your own school leadership. This week, we're going to be talking about collaborative response with my special guest, Kurtis Hewson. Kurtis Hewson is an award-winning former administrator and teacher, as well as teaching faculty at the post-secondary level. He's the co-founder of Jigsaw Learning, a co-author of the text Collaborative Response, 3 Foundational Components that Transform How We Respond to the Needs of Learners, with Corwin Publishing in 2022. And he currently works with districts and schools nationally and internationally, especially collaborative response frameworks and interacting with thousands of educators annually. He also listens to the podcast, and we have quickly become friends. Kurtis Hewson, welcome to Principal Matters Podcast. Why don't you fill in the gaps on that intro and tell listeners something else they may be surprised to know about you?
Yeah, you bet. Well, I'm super excited to be able to join you for this conversation, and yeah, honored to be part of Principal Matters podcast. As you mentioned, I've listened for quite a while, and yeah, it's a little bit of a thrill to be part of this. So my background is, as you mentioned in the intro, as teacher, administrator at the post-secondary level, but to add just a little bit of granular detail and surprising fact is I actually got into formal leadership at a very, very young age. I was tapped after approximately about a year and a half of teaching. And it was in a situation where the district was trying to grow some of their own leadership pool. And schools that didn't necessarily have the student population to have a principal and an assistant principal, but did have an experienced principal at the helm, they selected a number of those schools to put in place a assistant principal at like a 0.1 designation or something that was really, really small, but to start growing the pool. So I got a shoulder tap and was really not only surprised and humbled, but scared absolutely of jumping into that. But I did, and I guess rest is history. It's been now, I think, close to 27 years of being in education, but the majority of that has been in leadership roles. And so definitely learned by fire, made a lot of mistakes, which have helped gain a lot of wisdom over time. But it's been through that where now my primary role is, as you mentioned, working with schools and school divisions around how do we put really substantial structures and processes in place for high impact collaboration to happen so that we can respond to the needs of students, but do that in a way that's building capacity all the way through. And yeah, it's been those leadership experiences that I now continue to get to grow as a learner working with those other organizations. It's absolute thrill and not exactly the path that you map out at graduation or at points in your life where you're making that career path. But yeah, it's been a joyful road to be able to walk down and learn along the way.
Wow. I'm just trying to think about what that journey must have been like a year and a half into teaching, and suddenly you're stepping into that role as an education leader. Now, before we continue, I don't think I mentioned in your bio where you are geographically,
Yeah.
Curtis. So let listeners know where they can find you.
Yeah, so I'm located in central Alberta, Canada, and the community that I'm in is Lacombe, which is located pretty much in the not the geographical center of Alberta, but the population center, I suppose. And like I mentioned, it's work that then I do throughout our province, other provinces, US. I've had the opportunity to engage with leaders in Australia now and Iceland. It's been
Oh,
exciting to be able to learn from all these different systems and how we all are going about the same aspiration of just how do we ensure success for our learners.
wow. Okay, let's back up
Yeah.
because you spend so much of your work now with jigsaw learning, and I want to talk about your book, Collaborative Response. But before we go there, I want to talk about, because I'm sure there's someone listening to this conversation who's been in your shoes or who may be stepping into leadership when maybe they haven't been in the classroom as long. A lot of leaders spend a lot of time in the classroom before. So that's a unique experience. What were some of the things that, as you think back on that, that you're like, wow, I wish I could have, if I could have told my younger self this may have been a conversation I would have had with him. What were some of those lessons from that unique experience, Curtis?
You know, it's interesting that you asked that question. We have our own podcast, and that's one of our questions that we always ask is if you could go back and give advice to your former self, what would that be? So I haven't had that turned back on me before. So thank you so much for that. Um, you know, I don't think, like I've had others that have said, you need to have X amount of years of teaching experience before you can move into this. And I don't denounce that in any way. I wish I could have had some more experience. But on the flip side of that, I do think it taught me very, very quickly to understand that the expertise is not held in the role. It's held in how do you leverage the expertise of those around. So I learned very, very early, and it was a powerful lesson that I still hold today, that I can't lead by authority. And what I mean by that is, our traditional hierarchies that I'm the principal, therefore I will direct and tell what this will look like in each of our classrooms. I've always had to learn very early that the people around myself or within the team have greater expertise. So how do we leverage that really, really effectively? And it's a core principle that I still believe today, that when we can leverage everyone, we are stronger for it than relying upon a sole leader. Or, I I started by thinking I had to adopt that Superman syndrome mentality of, well, people will bring me problems and I'll fix them. I'll try and fix everything as a leader. And not only was it foolhardy, but I don't have the background teaching experience that many of the people bringing these problems to. So how do we create situations where we can synthesize and discuss and leverage the capacity of others? Because I found out very quickly, if we're turning and I'm thinking I have to try and solve all of these, that's not possible. And so that was a lesson learned out of necessity, but I think it's been a powerful one now to be in the place where oftentimes I do have the greater educational background than others in the room, but I still need to go back and say, no, the room's smarter than any one person. And that's really the key around the book that you mentioned, Collaborative Response, and the work that I've now been doing for over a decade with schools of leveraging that that incredible expertise that we have. I'll jump into just one real quick little story, Will. So it was my third school I was a formal leader in, my second as a principal, and I came into that school as the youngest staff member on staff. Every one of the teachers, and I think there was one educational assistant who may have been younger than me at the time. And again, it became readily apparent that the expertise in this building, there's hundreds of years of teaching experience that we have to maximize and leverage rather than relying on individuals or isolated practice. So those experiences have led to some powerful learning along the way. And that would be the advice I would give to my past self is don't think you have all the answers. Create systems and structures to surface and elicit the possibilities that we can explore.
Thanks for that. Systems, structures built around the capacity of the people that you're serving. And I loved how you said the smartest person in the room is the room. Thanks so much for that. Now, those lessons have not gone unleveraged with, I don't even know if that's a word. You have taken advantage of leveraging those lessons in the work that you're doing now. And so, first of all, congratulations in the way that you've supported schools for more than a decade. And in your book, Collaborative Response, 3 Foundational Components That Transform How We Respond to the Needs of Learners, you give some specific examples of how teachers and leaders can build layered approaches to ensuring that students aren't overlooked. So talk about that a little bit, because you get into the nitty-gritties of building capacity. How do you build layered approaches, ensuring that none of your students are overlooked?
So in the work, and I'll provide some further opportunities that could be included in the show notes to explore further for anyone that's listening that may be interested. We talk about those 3 foundational components of building collaborative structures and processes. That's one. The second is data and evidence that can inform those conversations. And then our third is development of continuums of support. So a continuum of supports that help us respond to the question, so what should we do? And we really stood on the work, the seminal work around professional learning communities. And when we were engaging early on, the literature related to response to intervention and multi-tiered systems of supports was fairly early in its understanding and adoption. But as we were implementing, and this was not an approach that was theoretical, it was within our school, building the airplane while it was flying, and finding out that we had these PLC structures that were in place. We had grade level teams, and we would develop goals and really follow the work that Rick Dufour was so instrumental in initiating and growing. That was happening. And then we also had structures in place that we could respond to students that were needing work or support beyond the classroom. So we had our school support team that was in place. And then there was always times that we would have to focus in on an individual student and get the right people around the table for that conversation. And through those, we were finding that there was 2 things that were happening. The first was sometimes the PLC work, even when we were getting better at examining our data and looking at what was needed, sometimes it wasn't always responsive to what we were seeing in the classrooms. And a perfect example of this is we had a grade level team that was working on developing really sound, consistent writing structures for students. And they were developing common prompts and collecting student writing, creating some co-created rubrics that they were utilizing, creating student criteria. They would have exemplars on the wall for students look at, like some really good work. But when you would look and examine the day-to-day in the classroom, writing probably wasn't the number one thing that we needed to focus on. There was some executive functioning skills that were really needing to be developed within the students. So sometimes we found that those, what we refer to now as collaborative planning efforts, were not as necessarily always responsive to what we were seeing day to day. And then on the other end of that spectrum, the more intensified team that we had in place, sometimes it didn't feel necessarily collaborative. And what I mean by that is sometimes a teacher would come and say, I've done everything. And it felt like sometimes it was a handoff to I've done everything I can possibly do. Now somebody else needs to take on this responsibility. And that's not a negative on the teacher. It's just the way we were structured. Like that's how we had set ourselves up to respond. And the other thing is we didn't have the right structures in place to be able to say, oh my goodness, this teacher who's brought this student forward for some additional support, the support is actually 3 doors down. If we could leverage that person's expertise in the classroom to help support this person, I think we could be building our skill set. So that's a little bit of a long-winded way to come about. We talk about 4 layers of team now, and it goes from collaborative planning to something really specific that we refer to as a collaborative team meeting that's intentional in its design, where I collaboratively plan with people I share a teaching assignment with, whether that's by grade level, or often in high schools, we see this by course load or department or faculty. To then in the collaborative team meeting, we meet with those that we share have different teaching experiences in. So that layering of team becomes important. And then the third layer becomes the school support team, where we are focused on how do we provide supports beyond the classroom. And then our fourth layer being what we refer to as an umbrella term of case consult. But really, it's anytime that we have to meet with one student on the agenda, and we put the right people around the table for that conversation. We find that through this layering, not only are we building classroom capacity and really looking at it from an upstream perspective, the idea of we're moving upstream to put as much capacity and leverage the expertise in the classroom before we ever come downstream to respond to those students needing supports beyond the classroom. It's through this layered approach that we ensure response for all students, but doing it in a way that everybody's capacity is growing in small incremental steps over time. It's putting a really systematic, and I talked earlier about the systems, the structures, the processes, putting that in place so that we have a robust culture of collaboration, that we're responding to students, but doing so in a way that everybody is getting stronger and deeper networks of sharing of expertise across the school.
Let's take a moment to thank our sponsors, and then we'll be right back. Why is IXL used in 95 of the top 100 U.S. school districts? Because it works. Research across 45 states show that IXL schools outperform other schools on state tests. With IXL, you get a personalized online learning and teaching solution that helps you improve achievement, empower teachers, track progress, and more. This one platform for K-12 helps teachers accomplish what normally would require dozens of other tools. For example, as students practice skills, IXL automatically adapts to ensure each learner is always supported and challenged at the right level. IXL also provides every student with a personalized learning plan to help them close knowledge gaps effectively. One of my favorite things about IXL is their personalized test prep tool. For exams like the SAT and ACT, IXL will analyze a student's most recent score and generate a custom list of skills to help them boost their scores. If you want to take the load off of your teachers so they can do their best work, IXL can help. Learn more at IXL.com/PM today. Wow. Okay. So let's just pause for just a moment, because and I've said this in other settings before too, and we alluded to this earlier, but the results that we often are seeing happening within our learning structures sometimes, or not sometimes, I would say often, are the result of the structures that we've built.
Yes.
And so you were not seeing in the PLC work that you guys were doing a consistent response to what students really needed. So as a result, you were able to figure out what's a better layered approach to collaboration that really helps us not overlook any students. And so for you, that involves those 4 areas: collaborative planning, team meetings, school support teams, and case consults.
Right.
And within each of those structured areas, you have a different purpose for that structure so that
Absolutely.
no matter what student you're thinking about within the context of that learning environment and classroom instruction, uh, you try to create an approach where every student's needs eventually get met through that
Yeah.
structure. Yeah.
And through this, Will, and the first line of the book is, this is not a silver bullet. It's hard work to get the systems
Mhm.
in place, and you're going to be constantly refining and tweaking, and you'll never have it perfected. But it's through that we can, like you said, ensure that we have a response for every one of our students. And those 4 layers of team then begin to align with the tiers of our continuum. And a key message that we share within the book, and I put forth with any one that we're working with, and that is, stop tiering your kids, tier the supports.
Mm.
And so that idea, it might sound like a minimal shift in language, but it's massive in mindset, where we're not tiering our students to say this is a tier 2 student, therefore it's this person's responsibility. We're saying no, we're tiering our supports. The child is everyone's responsibility, but we're going to layer the supports on through those different team structures that I talk through. And it's been really high impact work for schools when you start to look at that, seeing what we do as tiering the supports. It puts the onus on us as the adults and the professionals to determine our responses, where we were before tiering our students, and it was too easy for us to say, well, no, this is a tier 3 student, therefore it's this person or this team's responsibility to respond.
Okay, so let's take this. Let's as we're talking about the importance of tiering the supports versus tiering the kids, I want to just say the obvious, which is that I know as leaders, sometimes we hear really powerful models that someone else is using, and we think, wow, how can I adopt that model for better outcomes in my school? But so I want to take it to the next level, because even if you were to build a similar model within each of those areas of team meetings, school support teams, collaborative planning, case consults, and I know I didn't say them in the order that you did, but within that structure, you also have to build the capacity of your staff to have meaningful discussions around evidence-based teaching practice. And I'm using
Absolutely.
your words. So talk to us about, how do you do that? What are some of the ways that you, within those structures, you make sure you're having the right conversations?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is where that data and evidence component becomes so critical, because regardless of what data, so we often say to schools, start simple, pick one priority area that you're trying to move the needle on in your school. So, I mean, prior to COVID, lots of those priority areas were typically devoted to literacy or numeracy in a traditional sense. We found that during and post COVID, there's been a lot more emphasis put into well-being and trauma-informed care, those areas as well. So we often say, pick one thing that you want to start with, and then what will be the data that you collect in relationship to that. And so then we encourage leaders to, when we have that core data set that we're going to be examining, that we purposefully organize that data to help our teachers in each one of those layers of teams. So a critical component is just one, there's many, but a critical part of that is color coding that information. And so we'll often, again, from a simplistic standpoint, say that if we were to color code our information based on this simple criteria, and that being red for students that are not yet meeting our expectations, whatever that however we set that criteria of not yet meeting, yellow being those that are approaching, they're getting close, they're not there yet, but they're close, green being those that are meeting expectation, and then blue being those that are exceeding expectations. Then through those layers of team, the collaborative planning, we're looking at all the data overall and seeing where are our strengths and where are some gaps that we could look at for an overall student cohort, whether we're meeting in, again, grade level teams or subject area focused departments, depending on your school's configurations. But when we get then to the collaborative team meeting, if I were to ask you, Will, who's a student that you've brought to the conversation today? And as quickly as possible, what's a key issue that you are seeing? Our natural tendency is to go to the student who I'm seeing furthest away from where I would like them to be. It's my head would instantly go to the child that is taking the majority of my time and effort in the classroom. But through the color coding of this data, what we say is for the collaborative team meeting, we want to actually surface the yellow students. So those students that are close to seeing success, however we've defined that success at. And there's a few things that happen. Through the layering of team, we are saying within our organization that we have structures to already attend to those students where we're seeing the data that's color-coded as red, let's say, for instance. We're going to trust and rely that there's already a conversation happening around those students. But in that collaborative team meeting layer, we're surfacing those ones that are close. It may just take a shift in classroom practice for me to try implementing an idea that I heard from you. And some of the psychology behind this is if I try a strategy or a intervention or an idea from one of my colleagues, and I'm trying it with a student who was close already, and the likelihood of it having success is that much higher. Well, now I'm building further resiliency within the staff team to I'm not only wanting to go back to Will over and over again because the things he's sharing, I'm seeing actually have impact, but everyone's capacity is growing through that process, which will benefit all of our students. But it's such a subtle delineation of how can we use the data to actually put a collective focus on our students who are close through the color coding of that data. And it's a radical difference where I've been in and I've led schools where it felt like the majority of 95% of our efforts were dedicated to 10% of our population. And it sometimes felt a little bit overwhelming, or in some cases, maybe even hopeless of we're trying to put all of these different supports in place and we're not seeing the needle move to the same degree that we would like. And through this work, we don't say, well, we'll ignore those students. No, of course not. We have our other layers of team that will provide their supports. But this is how we use the data then to start flagging students with key issues that then we can attend to within our teaching practice. Sorry, I know that's a little bit of a large scale or bigger look at it, but if I've learned anything through the use of data and evidence, it's color code that information and then how do we purposefully use it at each one of our layers of team.
Yeah, I'm wishing we had like a whiteboard behind us right now, and you could be drawing and color coding. So for the purpose of listeners, I just want to repeat a couple of things. First of all, this is the kind of episode I would rewind and listen to again, especially if you're thinking through how to apply the lessons from this book, but which I would, by the way, Kurtis's book, I'm going to repeat it again. The Collaborative Response, 3 Foundational Components That Transform How We Respond to the Needs of Learners is available through Corwin Publishing or anywhere you buy your books. So get a copy. But I just want to focus on a couple of things you said there. First of all, that by identifying one area of growth and then using data to examine and organize what teaching practices that we're going to use to help target that area of growth. The thing that you've said that I'm not sure I've heard others explain like that before, Kurtis, is don't spend the majority of your time trying to figure out how to lift those who are the furthest behind, but look at those who are the closest to reaching that next achievement area, because you're going to be able to find practices that you can share among yourselves as you're collaborating with teaching ideas and practices with your team that can help lift that set of students pretty quickly. And so in other words, leverage those who are closest to learning. And I'm going to guess as a result of that, you're going to see an opportunity for those who are still struggling behind them to be experiencing remediation in a way that while those other students are being lifted up to that area where they were just a small gap in their learning, now these students that are further behind are also being lifted.
100%. You've got it exactly. And the idea here is through these collaborative conversations, I'm adding tools to my toolbox. Now, if I'm trying those tools with students who are having significant needs that are identified, and I'm not seeing those tools have success, I might be quick to discard them or not have an opportunity to hone them effectively. But if I'm putting them in place with a student where the likelihood is much greater that I'm having success, I'm going to hone, I'm going to build my toolkit. Everyone's will be expanding incrementally over time, which benefits all students. When every teacher's toolbox is getting more refined and more robust over time, that doesn't just impact those that we had said are close to achieving whatever that next level of success that we want to have, but all students, everybody's growing. And we often say within this work that every person is an expert and simultaneously a learner. And what I mean by that is I can come into a team meeting and share my expertise. I have things that can help everyone in this room, but nobody knows everything. We all can be learners in that situation and take something away from our colleagues. And it's fascinating through this work, even colleagues that have worked for more than a decade across the hallway from one another, but have never had a chance to examine practice together. This creates those opportunities for us on a regular and ongoing basis. And then through the systems, structures, and processes that are formalized, the informal collaboration that happens just takes a whole new level.
I talked to Kurtis as we're thinking about wrapping this up. I want to think about the time when we're recording this before listeners will hear it, and they're going to be hearing this sometime in the fall, probably in September, which means a lot of them will have been stepping into a new school year, at least here in the U.S. Yeah. And you'll have both. I've talked to both veteran leaders who are like, Will, as we're adding new staff, as we're bringing in new people, as other people are retiring, sometimes we make assumptions that about everyone understanding the systems and supports that we've created. But sometimes we have to take a step back and reteach. Sometimes we have to reteach our veterans, and sometimes we obviously have to teach those that are stepping in new. So this will be a really hard question for you to answer because everyone's situations has a different diagnosis and a different application. But if you were sitting down with a new or aspiring leader who's like, wow, I really want to be able to, in this new role, bring the kind of supports to my school where strong learning is happening, what feedback would you give them about collaboration? What are some things they can keep in mind so that they don't feel overwhelmed as they're learning this new role and supporting the work of good collaboration?
Yeah, so I actually will pass on some wisdom that I've gained from other thought leaders that I think mindsets are really, really important for us as leaders. And the first is I had the great opportunity to engage in a workshop. It was a fairly intimate, smaller setting with Jay McTighe. At one point, it was probably 15 years ago, but he had shared that as leaders, it's our responsibility to set the banks of the river and then let the water flow. And what he was messaging is we are responsible for setting the structures and the processes. So it again relates to Rick Dufour's understanding of loose, tight leadership. There's going to be some things that I will be tight on. So for instance, in my own role and in my own work, we'll be tight on things like we will have teams established. Teams will have norms that they've co-created and developed. We will have goals. There's some things that we will set as the banks of the river, but then as a leader, once those are established, don't try and micromanage the flow of the water. Let good people do good work within those structures. And that was Jay's message. So I think that one's a really important one, is trying to get out of the, I have to micromanage everything that's happening within my building. And no, I have to create structures so that good people can do solid work within that. And then I think the other piece that comes from some sharing way back in the 80s from a couple of individuals, Peters and Waterman, but Michael Fullen has popularized it since then, that notion of ready, fire, aim. And the idea that you ready yourself, we do some learning, we have some conversations, we maybe plant some initial seeds, but then fire. And it's through that firing that you learn. So that would be one of my main messages to new leaders is don't try and get it perfect in the planning, fire. Try some things and be vulnerable to be able to say, this may not work, and that's okay, but we're going to learn through the process and refine and adjust. And I'm really going to rely upon the team to be able to offer some of those refinements and adjustments. I also think if I was speaking to leaders, as you've mentioned, into the fall, of really understanding the importance of piloting or working with a smaller group. I mean, Todd Whitaker calls it, work with your champions to start off and then fan it out across our whole staff. So I'll use a real simple example. We were looking at a reading screener that we wanted to be able to ideally utilize school-wide, but rather than trying to convince everyone that we're going to try that, found one grade level that was willing to try, and we trialed it for a period of time, worked out the kinks, found out the best way to administer, to collect the information, and learned through that group, who were very willing to make mistakes, to endure an implementation dip and see through that. And then we could apply that as we rolled out to others, which again, I think sometimes we think we have to convince everybody that we're making a move before making a move, where I'd say, nah, convince that small group that you can work with to move with you, and then use their experiences to bring others on board.
Wow, Kurtis, thank you for that. There's so much wisdom in that. I also like to call that beta testing, where you take an idea and you find a committed group of people and you trial that first. And even that even works in larger settings too, where if you're trying to adapt a new master schedule or a new PLC schedule, why don't you try it out before you decide this is what we're going to be doing the rest of the year or all of next year? People listening to this in the fall, you may be thinking about, well, if we've already launched and I'm in the middle of a year and I need to see some things that need to be tweaked and changed, the answer would probably be, and I'm just going to feel free to fill this gap in, Kurtis, but I would just say, if you already have an existing system that you recognize is not working, then begin to beta test some samples or systems that you think might work. That way people can get a taste of it. They can get a sense of it. You can get some people that can buy into it, so that as you're looking toward next year, then you can readjust so that next year's schedule matches what these new priorities should be. Because there's always room to grow. So thank you for that mindset. Ready, fire, aim. In other words, sometimes just doing the work gives you an opportunity to refine and redirect. And then piloting and finding those champions to be your first users. As we wrap up, I want Kurtis, this is one of those conversations where people that are listening are going to be like, okay, not only do I need to probably re-listen to this and get the book, but I need to talk to Kurtis. And so I want to make sure that listeners have a way to stay connected with you. So what are some parting words that you'd like to say to listeners, and then how can they stay connected with you?
Yeah, so I think as far as parting words go, I think that it's just so incredibly important for us as leaders to give ourselves grace, and to understand that if you are doing this job the way it's meant to be done, you will make mistakes. along the way. And I used to be really hard on myself when that would happen, where now I preface with some vulnerability that we might stumble as we go along, but I'm willing to invest the time and energy to refine, to gather feedback, and to make adjustments as we learn together. I think when we can establish organizations as learning organizations, we're much better poised to deal with whatever is coming as challenges for us on not just the day-to-day, but the ongoing cycles that we have. So to me, I think that's the biggest one. And again, I'll repeat the same mantra that I basically started with, the idea of, as a leader, how can you build systems and structures and processes to then just let good people do good work? I come from a background with a mother who was a lifelong kindergarten teacher, so I have the utmost respect and honor for the work that happens in classrooms, and I believe the expertise exists in our schools if we can find a way to leverage it. So to connect, I would say probably the best way is through our organization, Jigsaw Learning. If you go to jigsawlearning.ca, that would be the website with all of my contact information there. Email is Kurtis, that's with a K, kurtis.hewson@jigsawlearning.ca. And again, on the website, then can find all the social media connects as well.
Well,
Will,
Curtis,
this has been an absolute pleasure to be able to engage with you.
It's been a pleasure for us too, Curtis. So thank you so much for giving leaders inspiration and ideas, but also just so many practical ways that they can build stronger collaborative response in their schools. Principal Matters listeners, thank you for listening. We'll talk to you next week. And Curtis, best wishes, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Will. Take care.
You can find free resources like this one at williamdparker.com. Subscribe for our free weekly newsletter, which contains bonus material, and also check out the links for Grow Academy's Masterminds, Executive Coaching, and Keynote presentations for my books, as well as from Principal Matters Associates. You can find out more under our speakers tab at williamdparker.com. Thank you for learning together, and thank you for doing what matters.